Hey everyone, and welcome to Slow and Steady, the podcast where you get to follow along as we try to figure out how to build and run a SaaS. Today is October 2nd, and Benedikt is on vacation, and I am thrilled to welcome Derrick Reimer to Slow and Steady. Derrick, welcome, and thanks for doing this. This is fun.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
It's completely my pleasure. I thought it would be really interesting. I hope we have some time to, do like traditional for these work in public podcasts, but an update and just kind of hear, where things are at on Static Kit. And I would really love to talk to you about that. But
Yep.
what I actually think would be really interesting, given your experience doing all of this and the fact that more of this format of show, like bootstrap build in public, is becoming more like popular and whatever, you've been in it for a while, to just talk about that.
Yeah.
The experience of building in public. So for the very small number of people who might possibly be listening to this podcast but don't listen to Art of Product, can you just give like the 45-second journey of drip level and
sure thing
Static Kit?
Yeah. So so I've been software engineer for the last 10 years or so, and mostly just kind of building startups. And so I think, I'm probably best known as the co-founder of Drip, alongside Rob Walling. We started that back in end of 2012 and built that for a long time in startup years. and eventually were acquired by Lead Pages in 2016. And along the way, I also built another product called Code Tree and sold that also around the same time that Drip exited. And so, I've been kind of on that journey for a while. And during that time, kind of started getting into podcasting as well. I actually started out with Ben Orenstein on the Giant Robots Smashing Other Giant Robots podcast.
That's a great name.
Yeah, Thoughtbots podcast while Ben was still there. So I joined him as a co-host there for, I think it was like 30 or so episodes. And then when he moved on from Thoughtbot, we decided to spin it out into its own thing. And that's when Art of Product was born. And we just crossed over 100 episodes. So it's crazy how fast time goes. I mean, it doesn't really feel like it's been that long, but when you add up total number of episodes, it's like, wow, we've been doing this a while.
A lot.
So, yeah.
Well, and so then along the way there, you struck on this idea of building level. And so can you just talk about that experience a little bit?
Yeah, so Level was a product that I set out to build right after I left Drip. So this was March of last year. And it was kind of born out of the problems that I observed with workplace communication, especially once, I felt it personally once we moved from our kind of team of 9-ish before acquisition to a team of 150. And like a lot of modern companies, we were kind of piping all communication through Slack. It was like the default mode of communication. And it was just a mess, like chaotic. Things were disorganized. Threads were not being used properly or well, and things were getting lost. People would DM me or hit me up in multi-person DM groups, and it's so easy to lose information. And I'm just like, how can this possibly be better than email? I mean, I know it has a lot of a lot of benefits, especially for remote teams who try to maintain like closeness and kind of that tight-knit community aspect. So there's pros to it, but definitely a lot of cons. And so that's kind of how the idea for Level was born, is like, how can we rethink workplace communication in a way where it kind of keeps the good parts of Slack, but also layers on some good parts of email and, create this kind of alternative platform. And I kind of started out with like a manifesto I published just to kind of kick off the conversation around this idea. And that got a lot of attention, a lot of buzz, a lot of people hopped on an email list. And I had kind of been feeling that there was a little bit of a groundswell among early adopters, or people who would be early adopters in this space, kind of talking about how Slack is bad. Like you would kind of see like little tweets here and there, or little like think pieces people would publish on Medium. Like they were just kind of starting to pop up more and more. So I'm like, I think there's a trend here. I think there's a wave that maybe I can hop on to.
Ride.
Yeah. And so I did what I thought was good customer validation, got a lot of feedback, got a lot of people on a list, like all the metrics looked good. The signals looked good. And of course, as it turns out, this is a massive product problem to solve. So I spent a good 9 months or so just working on the core, first version of the product, which was
Mm-hmm.
not multi-platform to start with. It was web only, and dealing with like building a real-time communication tool, because it had real-time aspects to it. So that is non-trivial from an engineering perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to get to 80 to 90%, but getting that last 10% of reliability is tough.
Yeah.
And so I just spent a lot of time learning some new technologies to make this work, building a single page application, which I'd never really done at scale before, to try to eventually provide offline support and just all kinds of like new things. And so it was a great experience from like learning wise, but it kind of the reality hit me pretty hard when I started to roll it out to what I thought was the most, the people who wanted the product the most. And I even pre-sold, $2,000 worth of licenses for Level. And like, it turns out almost all of them weren't actually in a position or didn't actually feel the problem badly enough to switch off of Slack.
Yeah.
They wanted 99% of Slack and 1% of it fixed. And so I kind of I came to a tough decision point. Like, am I going to keep forging ahead with this and trying to continue to, build out product as rapidly as I could and hope that it will get to the point where enough people will be willing to switch? Or is this not the best thing for a solo bootstrapper to be working on?
Yeah.
And that's when I
Yeah.
kind of made the hard decision that, all factors combined, like this is not the best use of my time, resources, my runway, all that. So
That had to have been a really hard decision to come to. And you were pretty open and vulnerable about it.
yeah.
So how much of the fact that you had been doing this in public, sharing it in public, talking about it in public,
Yeah.
how much of that weighed into your decision of, is this how I should or should not be spending my time?
Yeah, I mean, it will definitely stung a little bit. Like I've gotten so used to sharing the good parts and the bad parts. Like I try to do my best of representing the full picture as best I can on the podcast every week. So it was not easy, but it was something I was accustomed to, like being able to just talk about failure openly. And it's interesting. I actually, as soon as I came to the conclusion that like, okay, I feel like this is the right move for me to set this aside, I actually first, before I made my final decision, I went up north in Minnesota up to Lake Superior, kind of a nice getaway.
Okay.
I was sitting in a cabin on the lake, and I was like, you know what? Before I officially call this, I'm going to try to write down, like, put pen to paper or finger to keyboard, whatever, and like write down what is my rationale behind this, and will this actually turn into an interesting, story and an interesting like thing for the community to learn from my experience.
Yeah.
And I actually got a little bit excited about that. Like I feel like there is an interesting story to tell here, because I feel like I tried to pay attention to a lot of the best practices and do things the quote unquote right way. And yet here I was like staring down potentially a failed, product launch after a year. Like how did I get here? So I needed to dissect that for myself and to be able to like feel really confident that I wasn't pulling the plug too early. And so I sat down, wrote that. It took a couple of days. It's pretty long, and it's up on my blog, derrickreimer.com.
Yeah. I'll link to it if you haven't already listened to or read it, listener. It's really good.
Yeah. So I kind of just outlined, started with like what happened, what was the trajectory like, and then pulling apart like what are the things that went wrong despite what I thought went right. And once I finished writing that, I was like, yep, this is really clear to me. If I were advising somebody else in my position, like this is what I would advise them to do. And so I felt at peace with it. And I actually felt like the response I got from launching that post was really encouraging, and definitely like set aside, like counteracted any of the, ego blow or the, sting from doing all this stuff in public and then having it fail,
Yeah. Well, so I'm just kind of curious what's your take on the pros and cons of doing this? What advice would you have for me and
Yeah.
for Benedikt, who are, in the position of, we're still trying to figure it out. But
Yeah.
just going to talk about it and process it out loud along the way. What
Yeah.
advice do you have?
Well, I think there's very little reason not to, especially in the early stage. Like, I think a lot of people's initial reaction is like, well, what if people are listening to you and they start, like, your competitors start, like, stealing all your ideas? And it's like, we
Yeah.
all know how cheap ideas are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you'll even find people, I regularly see people, like, posting free startup ideas on Twitter. Like, these are not things that are
That's not the
sacred.
hard part.
That's not the hard part at all. And so I think, especially in the early days, you have very little to lose by being open, but there's quite a bit to gain. Like, I think there's a potential to, it's not guaranteed, but there's a potential to, start building up trust among the people who might be your customers.
Right.
And it doesn't, I think the benefits don't even have to extend all the way to, your potential people converting into customers. I think there's something to be said for just contributing more data into the ecosystem, of like, I'm another person doing this, and I'm outlining my, week by week, or however, whatever your cadence is, I'm outlining how I'm thinking through these problems, how I'm approaching them. And I think there's a lot of benefit in just kind of telling your story. And like, I kind of like this distributed thought leadership, as opposed to, like, a few people sitting up on the high mountain, telling everyone how everything should be done. Because I think there's just so many different paths and so many different ways to approach these startup things that we're all trying to do, especially as bootstrappers. Like, it's so easy for us to get caught up in listening to the loud voices, which are the venture-backed startups and the Paul Grahams of the world. And not that they don't have good things to say, but it's just for a very different type of company. And so,
and for any given topic that you might be facing,
right,
it's so much more helpful to hear somebody talk about it in depth for, quote, in depth for 20 minutes, who is in your context, in your, like, actual year, for one, but also size of company and dealing with that. I keep waiting for there to be like like an IMDb of podcast episodes, where we can go in there and, like, go by tag. Okay, customer acquisition. Like, which podcast has this been covered on, and where can I listen to it? So that's what feels really helpful about. And I'm surprised that Benedikt and I are already, like, 11-ish, or however many, whatever I said, episodes in, because it has gone really, really fast. And I've felt that experience that you're talking about, of, like, it feels good to, like, put something out there. It also feels a little bit like a diary, so to speak. Do you ever go back and listen to old Art of Product episodes when you're facing a particular issue? And, like,
I haven't done a lot of that, but I've been considering doing it. I know Ben talked about this recently, that he's been my co-host has been doing that, and listening back through, like, some of our early catalog stuff. And he's like, it's just funny to hear kind of what we were going through at that time, and what the thought process was, and how his thought process has evolved. It's it is pretty interesting to do. And I've thought about this too. It is a great thing to have, just to have it kind of documented somewhere, like what your mental state was through the process. Like, I think it can be a healthy thing to revisit. And I know, like, when Rob and I were building Drip, we didn't document it, like, publicly on a podcast every week, but we did record. We recorded for about a year and a half, every week or every other week or so. We would hop on and just record audio, and then Rob ended up stitching that together into, like, a kind of a mini audio documentary about the building of Drip.
I've not seen it. Is that public now?
It is. Yeah. I think it's,
gosh.
I think it's a Startup Stories podcast. Maybe it might be on, like, podcast players. We'll find a link to it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I don't know how I have missed this one. I'm getting ready to have a binge for the weekend, I think so.
Yeah. So I think it was like 20 hours of audio or something compressed down into a few hours, and it just kind of, stitched together, telling the story. And that was really cool. I've thought about doing something similar for, for products and stuff that I talk about on AOP. So
do you ever worry about oversharing, or I guess I guess what I'm asking is, how do you think through striking the balance between being transparent, honest, this is really me, I'm really going through this,
Yeah.
and there is a degree of oversharing that's just not appropriate for the medium. Like, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I think I tend to err on the side of reminding myself that most things don't matter, most things can be shared, but I think there's a line for sure. I think something that I actually am more concerned about is sugarcoating things or only telling the
Hmm.
positive side of things. I actually was kind of observing this. I'm like a member of the indie hackers community, right? And they
Yes.
recently started sending like milestone emails or whatever. Like every day, I started getting this email of like people
I've been
talking
getting
about stuff.
those. Yeah.
And I don't know, something about it. Like I get what they're trying to do, and it's kind of an interesting concept, but something about just getting like an email where people are constantly talking about like just good things that happened.
Yeah.
I started to feel a very similar effect to like what like I got off. I'm off a lot of social media. I don't have a Facebook account anymore. I have an Instagram account just for like really close friends. Like
Hmm.
and Twitter is tricky for me because it's such a industry hub for us, you
Yeah.
know.
I feel
But I
that.
think if it
Yeah.
wasn't, I would probably be off Twitter too, because
Yep.
I think this just kind of insidious quality of social media is that it's really bad for mental health. Like it just,
Comparison.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so seeing like a steady stream of just like people constantly celebrating good things, I'm like, where's the other side of the story, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
And so I'm always thinking about that, like how can I represent what's going on fairly? And so it's tricky. I think it would be bad if these podcasts just turn into, you know, humble brag over humble brag, you know, like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not what I would want it to turn into. So there's that element to it. I think there's also an element of when you get further along, you know, things like competition can be a concern. I think it's valid at a certain point to start worrying about like how much am I saying? Like if I'm building, you know, if I'm getting further along in my product and I unlock some traffic channel that's working really well for me, or I figured out,
Yeah.
I say I'm running an SEO strategy and I figure out like a set of keywords that are really, you know, working well.
Yeah. Highly.
I'm not going to say exactly what they are, you know,
Right.
because that would just be, that would not be wise.
Right.
So I think there's a certain level of detail that is appropriate. And then beyond that, it's like, you're just, it doesn't really benefit anybody except for if your competitors are listening and want to start, you know, stepping on your toes.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
I think it's important. I do think about like, if I'm going to share an update about something, is there something about this, the level of detail I'm providing that is can be generalized or can be actually helpful to people? Or is this so specific to what I'm doing that it wouldn't be helpful? And that's kind of where I draw the line for
Hmm.
myself.
That's a really interesting line to think about. Am I only sharing this because I want to brag? Am
Yeah.
I only sharing this because I'm just processing some therapy out loud?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But to try to find some way to make it that it offers up some knowledge,
Yeah.
or strategy.
And I
Yeah.
do say, like, I always like to say that on our podcast, we generally aren't sharing advice. Like, I'm not trying to package up like I've learned something new about how to do X, Y, or Z, and this is
Hmm.
like I'm not trying to provide an educational podcast, because I feel like the more I learn, the more I realize that there's so much nuance to a lot of this stuff, and it's actually, I'm very leery about like giving generalized advice. You
Yeah.
know, I'm pretty much like, this is what's working for me this week. And maybe there's something that can be generalized here,
Yeah.
but this is all raw, unedited. So I'm just trying not to like say like I've unlocked the secret on how to do whatever.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's really unsatisfying, but it's true that like every piece of advice should begin with "it depends" and it
Yeah.
should end with "your mileage may vary." And like, I mean,
Right.
it's a bummer because I was just having a conversation on the Mega Maker Slack community before this,
Mm-hmm.
where I was like trying to think through some framework with one of the other people in there, and it was
Yeah.
like, man, there are just so many contextual things that are important about this person's context that they're asking about that
Yeah.
there's not a formula
Mm-hmm.
that you can just say idea, run it through the grinder, and you've got a functioning business on the other side. Like,
Yep.
just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think.
But
Yeah. Go ahead.
That's I was gonna say, like, back to those indie hackers emails.
Mm-hmm.
I know the ones you got we're talking about because I started getting them, or I was getting them too.
Yeah.
And there was this moment, where I was like looking at my email in the morning, and the milestone was somebody, launched 5 days ago to 1,000 MRR or 5,000,
Right.
whatever it was. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was
Yeah.
basically launched 5 days ago, and now I have and I like felt like so just deflated,
Yeah.
and like, what's wrong with you, Brian?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why aren't you? And I had that same process that you're talking about there of, just remember, this is highly curated
Mm-hmm.
side of the story. There's a reason that they chose this thing to email. So I'm with you. Like, I think that's what I've enjoyed so much about AOP. And I mean,
Yeah.
like, your very recent story in
Yeah.
particular is like, this is not always pretty,
Right.
and it's doing a disservice to just like sugarcoat everything and act like everything's hunky-dory. So
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, I mean, I think it's almost safe to say that it's never pretty, you know, like that's one of those things like, where I'll almost use a never, an absolute term like that, um, because it's, just think about like if you had a close friend of yours was building up to the point where they launched a product and got to a couple $1,000s in MRR, like if you knew that person personally and you had been following along with their story at having like an actual relationship with that person, then of course you would be very ecstatic for them because you know the you know the whole story. But like just getting these tidbits of curated things that make you like, it's your brain almost assumes like this is an overnight success and I'm a failure because I'm not, like it starts
yeah.
filling in all these unhealthy gaps.
Hmm.
And I think that's a major problem with social media in general, and I think it's potentially a problem with just kind of a stream of positive milestones only. It's like you're
Hmm.
not getting the full story, and
Yeah,
that's,
for sure.
yeah, it's tough.
What are your thoughts on this format of podcast
Mm-hmm.
and like the regular check-ins? Like, what degree of it do you consider it to be like an accountability,
Mm,
like accountability partner, accountability, like just
yeah.
milestone, or what, or not milestone, but that's going to happen on a regular basis? What are your thoughts
Mm-hmm.
on that?
Well, I think, I mean, for me, it has turned it, whether it was intended to be or not, like it is something that weighs on my mind every week. I'm like,
Hmm.
what's my update going to be this week?
Yeah.
I think it's a good amount of positive pressure to make forward progress. I mean, I think similar to having, like a check-in with a boss, or or a check-in with an investor or something. Like, I think it's just, you want to tell a compelling story and have forward progress evidence. I think it's good to have those things and not just be in a cave where there's absolutely no accountability. I think setting arbitrary deadlines is not good, but I think this is a good way of kind of, giving yourself a mechanism to hold yourself accountable to
Yeah.
certain things. And it's like, yeah, if I don't have anything to talk about on the podcast this week, then that's probably a good sign that I'm not, diligently using my time well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It has struck me as a good forcing function
yeah,
that is not a tyrant
yeah,
either. Like,
yeah.
in the end, it kind of is okay if I don't have a whole lot to report,
Mm-hmm.
but I would much rather have something to talk about, good or bad, like we were just saying. I mean, being able
Yeah,
to share something that you tried that didn't work out is, it's just as good. It's, you learned
right.
something new. It's some kind of progress. It's not status quo.
Yeah, and if there was no progress, then there's probably a side of the story to tell that's not all positive, and that makes interesting radio too, I think. I mean, it took me a while to become convinced of that like people actually like hearing kind of the little therapy sessions that we have. But
Yeah.
I think people do enjoy those, and like you can often pull interesting threads out of that. That's almost more interesting than just, hey, I had all these great things happen this week. It's
Yeah.
like there's a lot to learn yeah, I haven't been sleeping well this week, or I've been sick this week, and this is what I had to do to try to overcome it. And I think there's interesting stuff in that too. So,
How has that process been for you, learning what makes for good radio, and
mm.
how much about that do you think about on a week to week basis?
Yeah, I think it's hard to force. Like, I think I've just gotten kind of better at just being comfortable on the mic every week.
Mm-hmm.
Starting out, I feel like I was very stiff and like not like, it just took me a while to get used to it.
The skill.
And yeah. And so I think it's just a skill that takes practice. But yeah, I think just trying to go in and pretend like we're not recording and pretend like it's just a conversation, like I feel like that makes the best radio, is when it's a fluid, free flowing conversation. It doesn't feel like an interview, or it doesn't feel like something where I'm having to prepare for it a bunch.
Right.
Yeah. So it's just been a process over time.
Yeah, cool. Can you just kind of give an update on Static Kit, which is what you're working on now, and
yeah,
that
So
came to be?
Yep. So Static Kit came about midsummer. So after Level wound down, that was in May when I officially kind of pulled the plug on it, and then I kind of spent a little while thinking through like what do I want to build? What have I learned from Level that will influence how I go about deciding to do something in the future? And I did a little bit of blogging after that, which was good. It was kind of following in the same path that I took with the retrospective piece, which is just like, let me think through in writing how I'm going to go about choosing my next thing. So I came up with some criteria for myself. Like, I don't want this product, the MVP should be quick to develop and ship. It shouldn't be, so mission critical that, businesses like running their entire business on the thing.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be like, require, native apps across, mobile and web platforms and desktop platforms. Like, I don't want to maintain a bunch of code bases. So I came up with kind of this list of criteria, and then tried to control my level of stress and like anxiousness to get something going again, and just kind of give myself time to think and breathe and kind of put my ear to the ground and see what are some markets that I have access to that have a need that I can tackle from a unique angle and enter the market. And it's hard. I mean, there's a lot of good, solid advice in the community that's been floating around. I mean, Justin Jackson's been a good voice lately, just kind of beating the drum about like, finding like serving markets and not coming up with ideas, but searching for problems. And like, he's been a very good voice in that respect. And like, I've been trying to, it's been a good reminder whenever I read a blog post of his, and like internalizing that. But it's also been like, it's frustrating too, because it's like these are inherently hard things to find, like finding a market that has a gap that is worth filling, that you have access to, and that, on and on and on, and fits all your criteria is tricky. And that's why there's not, hundreds of successful startups being cranked out every day. It's like,
right.
So there's a bit of art and science to finding that. And so, I started kind of, I had this idea in my back pocket for a while. Like, I've been a fan of static sites, basically, as opposed to using a content management system like WordPress, using a static site generator. And there's tons of these now, and more every day being built, to basically, build a website in a version controlled code base and run it through a build process and generate static files. And then you can, that leads to all kinds of benefits, like really performant hosting and really secure website, and on and on and on. There's all the benefits.
Yeah.
And
so the first thing of in Static Kit that you've launched with it, that I'm using on my Statamic site is forms.
Yep.
Which, like, any developer, like really good backend developer that's about to hear me say this is going to roll their eyes.
Yeah.
It's like, mail forms on sites are really hard. They're at least annoying.
Yeah.
And so I was using Static Kit from like day one.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
And so that's interesting. It's also, though, in the name Static Kit, not Static Form. So you obviously have other ideas that you're going to be rolling into this. So how are you going about that process of validation and discovery?
Yeah, so that's exactly how I've been thinking about it. Like Forms itself there's tons of these little services out there that offer form endpoints. Ben Orenstein used to run one called FormKeep at Thoughtbot. There's probably 15 other ones. I just the other week, like, someone did a roundup post of these, and like there were like a couple on there I'd never heard of until I read this blog post. And so it's like,
Right.
wow, there's a lot of these out there. So I mean, that's kind of it's a crowded space. I still think there's it's interesting because it's a problem, it's a known problem, it's well defined, and I think there's an opportunity to execute really well on it, especially for different environments, all these static site generators coming out. How can you make the experience really smooth? And so I intentionally went for, something that I could build the product within, a month or whatever, and kind of relentlessly refine it, which I'm kind of still going through right now. I'm trying to make the developer experience really, really good, really top notch. But it's like the product is essentially feature complete for like a majority of the use cases out there. So now I get to really think about, how can I get distribution for this thing? How can I get it in front of the right audiences, get people using it? I get to really focus a lot of my energy on kind of getting traction and doing marketing things, because product is definitely keeping up, as opposed to Level, where like I was always behind the 8 ball on product. Like there was always so much to build on product, and so many of people's objections would be like missing product features. And at this point, that's not really the case with StaticKit. I mean, it's still new, so I don't have a ton of awareness right now, but I get to focus my effort on that. And
is that why you're focusing on awareness and not on building the second piece of the kit?
Yeah, that's been I've been considering, like, I still don't know the right answer to this. Like, when is the right time to start building out the toolkit? But I mean, so the vision is for it to be like the perfect complement to your static site generator, to basically build the equivalent of what you could do with WordPress or Squarespace or Wix or one of the other site builders, So form collection is a big one, being able to put any kind of forms on your site. There are other things like web analytics and, simple payment collection and search. These are all kind of ideas that are kind of floating around there. Authentication, being able to restrict a page on your website. So there's a bunch of different areas that this could go. But I'm trying not to rush into anything too quickly. Okay. And so I think where I've settled on it for now is that I'm trying to get a nice base of paying customers for the form solution today. And, and then bolster the kind of free side of the business too, where there's, I want to see a lot of people coming in using the free plan, and just kind of get more awareness around it. And then I can hopefully kickstart more meaningful conversations and figure out, like, what do developers who are building static sites in-house need? What do agencies who are building static sites for clients, what do they need? And I'm kind of, since I built the product first, I'm kind of using this first tool as that conversation starter to get people in the door, as opposed to just like putting a vaporware landing page up and then trying to spark these conversations.
Right.
So
right. On I think it was the most recent episode of Art of Product, you were mentioning how your paying customer base, it's still like small and growing.
Yep.
But you've got an annual plan now. Like, yes. It feels like that you've got some momentum going in that direction. Does it feel like qualitatively different to you than the early bits of Level, where you had you mentioned earlier, like a couple $1,000s worth of like pre-sales or whatever? Do you have a feel that it's different, or are you still just working through it?
It feels definitely different in good ways. Like, the numbers are much smaller. Like, I don't have thousands and thousands of people on a list. Like, the Level list got up to almost 7,000 people, I think. Man. But I think what that taught me is that there's a difference between people who are actually like genuinely a good fit to become paying customers of your product, and people who are just a fan of you, or a fan of what you're doing, or just kind of interested. And that is a potential hazard of doing this building in public thing that I think everyone should be aware of too. That, like, you're getting a lot of people invested in you and your story, and that's good, but that also can lead to a lot of false signals. Like, if you could end up with, a good chunk of your podcast listenership on an email list for the product you're building, and maybe only a tiny slice of those would actually be a good fit. And so on the one hand, you kind of don't kind of don't want those people on your early access list if they're not
Yeah.
really, well targeted. And so I almost feel like it's when you don't really have an audience or you're not well known, it's almost easier to get, if you start working traction channels and start getting like targeted traffic to your product or to your landing page, and you start getting people on the list there, the numbers are going to be a lot smaller, but they might be a lot better targeted. And you might just have less noise. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like this has been less noisy in that regard. Like, the people who I'm definitely getting people who just kind of know who I am from the podcast or whatever, signing up and not really converting in any respect. Like that's still happening, but it's happening a lot less than it did with Level, because I haven't been hyping it quite the same as I did. Like I kind of just went out guns blazing with Level and like, here's the manifesto, and like working the hype machine. And that didn't really work out to my favor, like just because you can get a lot of people on a list doesn't mean that they're actually going to convert. So
cool.
Yeah.
Well, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up, but what's next? What should we expect to start seeing in the near future on Static Kit? And
yeah, so some good, exciting things in the works right now. I just launched a integration with Zeit, one of the kind of big two static site hosting providers. And so that's really, really cool to see. Cool. And I have some other similar things in the pipeline. So that's exciting, and I'll be interested to see what the returns are on kind of awareness and distribution from that. Yeah. And then I also have another cool product feature that I'm being a little bit light on the details about it right now. I kind of draw the line a little bit on that one. Yep. But
speaking of, yep.
But it's I think it's going to be really a really exciting iteration on how to like configure your static site resources. So
okay, yeah. All right. Very intriguing. We'll stay. All right. Hey, Derrick, it was a pleasure to meet you, and thanks for hopping on the show. I continue to be a fan. So thanks again, man.
Thanks for having me.